All right, we're 2 o'clock GMT, 10 o'clock here in Canada in the morning. And so welcome everybody. Thanks for coming to this Wednesday session of IFAJ's E-Congress Week, which we organized in the spirit of the Congress, which of course was supposed to be hosted this week by our good friends in Denmark. And so since we can't be there physically, we're going to be there in spirit. So this is the third session, and the first two were excellent yesterday, particularly with Theo De Jager from the World Farmers Organization. We'll be posting those on the website for future reference, as with this one here. And so just a few of the rules and regulations. We will shut off your videos and mics to preserve bandwidth and keep the noise out of the background as people are coming in one by one. But you have the little controls at the bottom. You can wave your hand if you want to speak. You have the chat box at the bottom of the screen, so you can send us a message and we'll be monitoring that. Or if you have a question, I'll help support Dorte as she does the moderation. And with that, I will hand it over to you to start off and give the introduction of our speaker.
Yes, thank you very much, Hugh. I'm glad to welcome you all to this webinar and posted from Denmark or sent from Denmark, as we're sad not to see you all here in Denmark this year. We can at least do this, one of the planned highlights from the Danish tour. The Danish Congress. I'm glad to welcome John Hensen. He is a skilled reporter at the Danish newspaper Politiken, one of the national papers here in Denmark, and he is head of the Investigative reporting group. The last few years has presented a lot of investigative reporters across borders corporations, and we would like to hear about how you do that in reality, not just in theory. And John has a lot of knowledge on how to do that. So thank you very much for taking the time to be here, John.
Thank you for inviting me. Maybe I should just say a few words about myself and what I've done so far. I'm working, as Dorte said, at Politiken right now. I've been here for the last 10 years. Before that, I worked for another newspaper in the same media group. It's called Jyllandsposten, and for the last 17 years or so, I've been a full-time investigative reporter, and still am. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about international collaboration on investigating and researching and publishing, and I'll try not to speak for too long, because I think the discussions should be mostly guided from what your questions might be. But basically, I think it's a very good idea to collaborate internationally, because it's rather simple. You've got more resources in terms of manpower and time, in terms of specific skills, expert knowledge from other reporters, ideas, and expanded geographical reach. And that's only one side of it. That's the research and investigation side. The other side is the publication. The impact is so much bigger when you have a lot of media in a lot of countries publishing on the same story or the same agenda. There are pros and cons of it, of course. I'll try to mention some of them. I'll talk a little bit about how this has evolved over the last 10 years and give some examples of projects I have taken part in. My first experience with this is some 10 years ago, when you remember there were some leaks through WikiLeaks. There was one called Cablegate. We got sort of a pirate version of the database with no connection to Assange. And it was a colleague at a Norwegian newspaper called Aftenposten who got hold of this database, and I heard about it, and I contacted him and said, "Can I be part of that? Can I help you research this? Can we share the stories and so?" And he said, "Well, yes, that might be a good idea, but you have to come to Oslo. That's the capital of Norway, because I do not trust the internet lines between Denmark and Norway because they go past Sweden, and I'm sure the Americans are tapping in on these lines." And 3 years later, when Edward Snowden was there, we learned that he was right. So physically, I traveled to Oslo, and we worked with these documents. It was a rather primitive database full of Word documents, and it was rather difficult to work with. But we improvised. It grew underway with reporters from more countries. There came somebody from Sweden, somebody from Germany, somebody from Holland, as the days went on. And we improvised and sort of tried to figure out how we're going to deal with this, how we're going to avoid scooping each other with what was sort of common knowledge and stuff. And it was great. It was a new experience to me. I got in contact with a colleague from Portugal who said, "Can I come to Copenhagen to look at the documents you got from Oslo, because there might be some Portuguese stories there." And there was certainly good stories. So he was here, and he worked at our premises for, I guess, 10 days or something like that. That was a very nice experience, I think. So I thought I wanted to do some more of that. And then in 2013, I got the chance to work with the ICIJ, the American International Corporation of Investigative Journalists. It's based in Washington, and it was back then in 2013. It was quite a small operation. It was. We were working on a data leak called offshore leaks. It was very primitive and difficult to work with database. We were not that many, and we were not that well coordinated, but nevertheless, we got some good stories out of it. And then the next year, 2014, we had what was later known as LuxLeaks, which was kind of a breakthrough for us. And still it was a small operation. I think we were 30 journalists when we had the first meeting about the data that was leaked from PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers in Luxembourg. And it was a breakthrough in the sense that it managed to sort of push a political development, both in the EU and the OECD, about doing something about this systematic tax avoidance that these leaked documents told us about. And during this work, sort of the principles for this collaboration came in place, principles which we have worked after ever since. And the central principle in this is a phenomenon called radical sharing. And that means that whatever you find during your research, you share it with all the other in the project. And you have to get used to that, because we're sort of in the habit of chasing, solo stories that can be our own use. But once you sort of see the value of it, once you see what it can do, you learn to like it, and you learn to even like it a lot. It takes place like this, that typically we start with a common meeting, sort of a partner meeting in some central place in Europe or the US, to discuss something like all the sort of the central decisions when to publish. Are there certain stories that we should put on certain dates and things like that? And then as we work, we communicate pretty much with each other in a forum, just an internet forum like so many others. It has been created specifically for the ICIJ. And we started with that during LuxLeaks, which was kind of easy to work with because it contained very few documents, a few hundred documents actually. So you could actually manage to read all the documents and to pick out the ones you were going to do stories about. And we were all very happy about this LuxLeaks because, as I mentioned, it was a breakthrough. And I think it was the moment where a lot of people learned that the ICIJ existed. And for example, that I was a part of it, my newspaper was a part of it, which is rather important. I'll get back to that. The next year, we did another leak story called Swiss Leaks. It was a leak from a bank in Geneva, HSBC bank in Geneva, and more or less along the same lines as LuxLeaks. Nothing really new was happening there. The next real breakthrough came in the year after, again 2016, with the Panama Papers. It was a breakthrough sort of in two ways. It was a gigantic data from this law firm in Panama, Mossack Fonseca. It was almost 12 million documents, not 12 million pages, but 12 million documents. Some of them were more than 100 pages. It was more than 2 terabyte data, which is quite a lot when it's almost only text data. So that demanded a very efficient, big and efficient data setup. So that was the reason that we today have a very efficient setup for that. I can tell you that once when we have documents like that in our database, searching the data is it's better, it's smoother, and it's more efficient than when you use Google, for example. It's magnificent, and it was a breakthrough in another sense as well, because from Panama Papers, the collaboration became much bigger. This story was global, so we sort of reached out to all continents: Africa, Asia, Latin America. And when we met the first time in Munich, we were way beyond 100 reporters to this first meeting. And this first meeting, it took place more than 6 months before we published. And at this meeting, we heard about some of the main stories that were to be published 6 months later. And I remember thinking, this is going to go bad in some way, because more than 100 journalists from all over the world cannot keep secret about stories that are so interesting as the ones we learned about there. But I was wrong. It was actually we actually did all stick to the plans, and nobody scooped nobody in any way. I've talked to a lot of people who think that's very peculiar. That it's possible to do it that way. But I think the explanation is that, first of all, everybody in the project really wants this, and everybody understands that it's all going to collapse if just one of us sort of do not abide by the rules, or so that's why it's succeeded, and we actually never have any problem with people not sticking to the agreements. There's been a lot of focus, of course, on data security all along, but from Panama Papers we really turned that turn that up. We only use encrypted mail. We have a secured platform and strict rules for how to communicate and things like that. But I can tell you that the Sunday evening in April 16, it must have been, where we all pushed the button and published the first story at precisely 8:00 p.m. It was crazy, because we ended up being more than 100 media joining this, and in the hours from 8:00 until midnight, the hashtag Panama Papers generated more than 100,000 tweets per hour. So it was, from one moment to the next, it was all over the place, really. And that was really fun to be part of. And then we've since that we have had Paradise Papers in 2017, Implant Files in 2018. That was more or less running along the same rails as the Panama Papers. So I'm not going to be more specific about that. I could tell you a lot about the practical, how we deal with this, all the practical issues, how we do this and that. But I'm sure you're going to ask some questions about that. So let's save that for the questions. Today, ICIJ is quite a big organization with a lot of very skilled data people. They have their own reporters who are also working on the research and doing stories along with the media partners, and a staff who find partners in countries where the story we're working on is important, but where there are no ICIJ members. And one important thing to underline is it's reporters, it's journalists who are members of the ICIJ. It's not media organizations. I'm a member. Politiken is not a member, and neither myself or Politiken has ever paid a penny for all this we have gotten from the ICIJ. It's funded by funds. American funds, most of all. So it's a free ride. What we contribute is our skills and our work. And I've been one of the founding fathers of another collaboration, a European one called EIC, European Investigative Collaboration. And in that, in contrary to ICIJ, in the EIC, it's media companies who are members. One company in each country, and in the EIC we pay to be a member because there are some expenses that has to be covered. But it's a very, very small organization. There's a coordinator, and we have a weekly web meeting. But there's no sort of organization as such. We have our own servers, which are placed with Spiegel in Hamburg. We have a secured forum where we communicate. We have a database for documents. We have done some fine things. I think the biggest we have done was called Football Leagues, which we have done in 2 rounds, and that did some very nice revelations about some of the biggest football clubs in the world. And a third way I'm involved in international cooperation is I took the initiative to sort of an informal collaboration in the Nordic countries with Helsingin Sanomat in Finland and VG in Norway, Dagens Nyheder in Sweden, and Politiken in Denmark. I just sort of sent mails to some contact persons I knew from various other connections. We had a meeting in Copenhagen, and we just agreed on, how to collaborate. And now we meet 2 times a year, and we have a common forum on the Slack platform where we primarily sort of exchange ideas for stories and contribute to research on each other's stories. It's quite informal, really. And it was easy for me to set up this collaboration, and I think that says something about what I find most valuable about collaborating in this way, is that you over the years you build quite an efficient network of colleagues around the world who are happy to help you. If you need to find something in the country where they work, which might cost you a day or two's work to find, but the colleague maybe can find it in 10 minutes, and he doesn't mind to. And just to give an example of this network thing, the Portuguese I told you in the beginning, who came up to me in Copenhagen to see documents from WikiLeaks I got in Oslo. It's called Michael Pereira. I've kept the connection with him ever since, and today I meet him both in ICIJ and the EIC. So that's been a long-lasting connection, and you get a lot of them when you cooperate like this. That was actually what I what I intended to say as a beginning. So I guess if it's okay with you, we could take some questions from here.
Yeah, let's do that. Owen Roberts has a question. Your advice to work with others, can we, these sticky issues of competition, you said it earlier that it involves radical sharing. Mm-hmm. What is radical sharing?
Well, radical sharing is that you share everything with everybody, and that means that if most of what I've been doing with the ICIJ has been stories based on leaked documents. So it's sort of the sport is to go through these documents in the most efficient way, and whenever you discover something that you think might be interesting for your colleagues in, let's say, Belgium or Argentina, you post it in the forum and say, I just found this, I think it looks interesting, and maybe you should have a look at it. That's one way of sharing. Another way of sharing is that at a certain point of a collaboration on a certain project, you make sort of a story memo where you list the stories you plan to do in this project, and describe what's in the story, what are the documents that it relies on, and things like that. And it's also like, let's say some of the partners are TV stations, and they share their footage. We share interviews, we share, well, everything, actually. That's what it means, and that's why that's why, because as you say, that of course there's a competition issue in that. Because if you are to work like that, the reporters involved cannot be head-to-head competitors. So in theory, there's only one member in each country. That's only theory. We are two members in Denmark, myself and a colleague from the national TV station. And then it's up to us. To sort of find a way of working together, and that has not been a problem, because he's a documentary guy, I'm a newspaper guy, and we can sort of sort things out between us. I know it's the same in Germany, where they're both Süddeutsche Zeitung and two TV stations are members and things like that. But it would be very difficult if you thought that, for example, two TV stations in the same country, two major TV stations in the same country, I think that would not work.
Okay. This cooperation across borders, is it only for investigative reporting when you have a big leak, or is it also for everyday journalism?
No, it's only for investigative. It's only for these large international stories. It's not always a leak. We did a story in 2018 that was not a leak. That was kind of peculiar and unusual. But apart from that, it has always been a leak, and that's why I think earlier I mentioned it was important that a lot of people during Lux leaks first and then Panama Papers got to know the ICIJ, because if somebody wants to, if a source wants to leak something, where does he go? Well, if he had heard a lot of stories about the ICIJ and saw that they had an impact and they could make a story roll all over the world, well, maybe that's where you should go. So in that sense, it's important.
Okay. So it's not for everyday journalism, these big corporations, 30 journalists or more, but do you use it in your everyday reporting?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I can. First of all, I've certainly learned a lot by joining these projects, because I've worked together with really skilled, really good colleagues from other countries, and you can learn a lot from them. That's one way of using it in your everyday journalism. And then, as I mentioned, I've had a lot of instances where I had. Where I could use the network. You know, if you said, I cannot get into this, I cannot sort of get access to this company register in Belgium. Can I call somebody in Belgium who knows how to do that? And things like that. That's very helpful in a day-to-day business.
Okay. And how much are these networks based on personal knowledge, personal network, and coincidence, and how much are they based on hard work and time and strategic moves?
That depends. That depends exactly what you mean about that. Do you mean how do you get into these collaborations, or as to how
but has it been coincidences that you got into all of this, or has it been strategic moves from your side?
It's been I'd say it's been a mixture, because in the beginning, the first one I mentioned this the Cablegate, the WikiLeaks Cablegate leak. I just I knew it was out there. There were stories about this upcoming story. There had been two WikiLeaks before that, and this Cablegate, there were stories about this is upcoming, and I knew that in Denmark, Assange cooperated with the media already, so I didn't have a chance to that. And then I heard of this colleague in Norway who had this pirate version of the data, and I just I did a lot to get in contact with him. I sent him a lot of emails. I gave him a lot of calls, and then I went through, and it was a little bit more spicy when I joined the ICIJ, because then there were the first project I worked with. It was the offshore leaks back in 2013, and I knew about this leak because there was stories being published from this leak in other countries, but not in Denmark. And I contacted the ICIJ and said, "What's going on? Why are there no stories in Denmark?" "Oh, it's because the national TV station is our Danish partner, and they're not planning to do anything before a documentary in the fall." I think that's no good, because all the news is out there now. So you should let me have a look at it. And then after some negotiations, they said, okay, if you can make a deal with the guys at the TV station, and they think it's okay, then it's okay for us. So I did, and I have to admit I played a little bit hardball to make them understand that they should let me have a look at the docs as well. But okay. we are good friends today. but since then I've been a part of it. I know that because it's difficult I know I have a colleague at another newspaper here, and she just she became a member of what's the collaboration called OCCRP, which is also very well known. And the way she did it is that she went to a lot of these international conferences of investigative reporting, the GIJN, the RE in the US, and so on. And she is, what should I say? She's got a strong stomach in the bar late at night, and she just got connections. And every time she learned somebody new, she gave him her card, and she said, "If you ever need a partner in Denmark, I'm ready." So at the end, she was contacted by the OCCRP and got in there. So it's a question of personal contacts.
Hard work and a lot of beers, it sounds like.
Yeah, I jumped.
For some.
I didn't. For some, yeah.
That's one way into it. Okay, there's a lot of questions coming in. So let's take some short answers. Has anybody ever not respected to be a part of this collaboration process and has leaked a part of it?
Nope, never.
Nope. And nobody has been thrown out of the corporations?
Yeah. I know of some that have been thrown out, but I'm not sure I know why. That was it was done very discreet, so I don't know what the reason was.
Okay. What is the longest time you have spent on an investigative story?
Well, that depends, because I'm working on a story that I started working on back in 2015, but you know, then it's on and off, and I think we all know about the stories that develop, and you go back to it, and you leave it again, and you go back to it. But if you're talking about sort of in one stretch, I think 5 months or something like that. Okay. 4 or 5 months.
Yeah. Has radical sharing been difficult to sell to your publisher? Are they okay with that point, part of the deal?
I'd say you have to explain it to them. But on the other hand, I remember I was in a radio show telling about this, and the host of the show says, that makes journalism sound beautiful.
It does, but also very risky.
Risky indeed, yeah. But I've had no. Of course, I have to explain it, but I've had no problem with my editors about that. Because you can understand it once you have it explained.
Okay. And how about convincing them to invest all this time and cost of becoming part of the team?
Yeah, well, I guess you all know how it is. Of course, you have to argue why do you need all this time. But I've not had. It has not been very difficult for me. But then again, I'm a full-time investigative reporter. I'm not leaving another beat to do this. So this is sort of what I'm meant to do. So it's more difficult for other reporters, I'm sure.
But you can also do you also experience I just need 1 more week argument?
Yeah. Of course.
You said it would be a month, but I just need 1 or 2 more weeks.
Absolutely. But then I hopefully I'm able to explain what's going to come out of this 1 or 2 weeks more, and then say, okay, that's a good idea.
Okay. Have you been encountering challenges from your sources during your investigations?
Oh yeah, absolutely. All kinds of challenges, of course. people who flat out denies what I can see in the documents. People who use expensive law firms to send letters with a lot of threatening stuff in them. The most sensible I've ever dealt with are football players in football leagues. Almost all of them send us threatening letters from their lawyers, and well, you just have to deal with that. And I'm happy to work in Denmark, where it's pretty hard. It's pretty difficult to stop media from publishing stories. But it has been tried, and I've, for example, we had one that was football leagues. I think we cooperated with the Sunday Times, and they were actually banned from publishing the stories. So it's much easier to do that in the UK than in a country like Denmark.
Is that a reason why the international cooperation is a good idea? That if one is banned from publishing, the others can go forward anyway? Absolutely.
Because, of course, that was what we did in the case of football leagues, that we published the stories in English on our websites, and then they were perfectly available to people in the UK.
Okay. This is question more here. Do you get paid enough to justify tough investigative work?
Yes, I think I do. Actually, I'm happy with my salary, and I don't think I don't think I need an extra good salary for doing investigative work, because I think it's funny. I think I enjoy it. So it's what I want. It's what I want to do.
Okay, and let's clarify. You're not a freelancer. You're a full-time employee at Protein.
Yes.
Yes. Would it be possible to do this on a freelance basis?
I don't think so, because I think the prices that are paid for freelance journalism could never you could never make a decent salary from what you could from the time you have to spend to do this. It's I think it would be impossible. There was actually in Panama Papers there was a colleague from Iceland. He was actually a freelancer. But I think he got some help somewhere from somewhere, because he had some of the main stories. I don't know if you remember the Prime Minister of Iceland actually resigned as a result of it. That was one of the biggest stories. So he managed to work his way through it. But it must be difficult.
What is the most important don't in this kind of work?
Well, the most important don't, I think it's don't mess with the security, with the data security, because you risk you risk compromising the whole project for everybody. There was an example when we published Panama Papers. Then there was a TV station who wanted to show that the database, sort of an image of the database on the screen. And although the reporter thought he had blurred the URL in the top, he hadn't. And then that might have been enough for somebody to hack his way into the database. So I think some 8 hours after publishing the first article, the database had to be closed for almost 2 days. That was not very convenient, because we were supposed to keep on working with it, but that was necessary. So that's really a don't.
Yep, sounds like it. More questions here. How can cross-border journalism overcome national bias and prejudice in order to contribute towards well-informed, more accountable and democratic societies?
Well, I think it can, in the way that it makes it possible for us in the more privileged parts of the world to support, for example, to support media in African countries that do not have the tradition of a free press that we have, and possibly do not have the resources, do not have the experience and things like that. We've seen that work both in Africa and Latin America, and I think that's has contributed to a lot in that way.
Okay, interesting. And more questions. People are really listening in here. Have you ever felt in danger physically or known of others on your investigative teams that have been threatened because of what they do?
For my part, once a lot of years ago, because I acted stupidly. I was in search of a suspected criminal he was part of a big scam, and also he was part of a motorcycle gang, and he had been convicted for illegal weapon possessions and violence and things like that several times, and I sort of went to his address to knock on the door, and he was not at home, and then I threw my business card in, and then at the very time I let it go, this business card, I remembered that my private address was listed on it. So I had a few days where I was a little bit afraid, but nothing ever happens. But we had in some of the stories, some of the projects we have done in the ICRJ, we have had colleagues that were in actual danger. I would say mostly our Russian colleagues for some parts of the project, we have had to bring them out of Russia, and so they could do their investigation elsewhere, because we were afraid they were in danger. And also, I think we have some Middle East colleagues writing about some arms smuggling and drug dealers and things like that, and they were not safe either. There was, I think it was from Venezuela or was it from Bolivia, where they simply had to flee the country and stay in Florida for some months. So yeah, I had on during this coronavirus, and that's a terrible thing. I had a colleague in Slovenia who was he was very critical about the way the government was dealing with the corona crisis. They made all kind of emergency legislation, and then suddenly he was posted in state-controlled or government-controlled media as a fugitive from the psychiatric ward, with pictures and everything. That was pretty scary for him.
Must be.
Yeah.
What is the very important factor to hinder investigative agricultural journalism, and how to overcome that, as you see it? Is a question.
To what? To hide?
Yeah, to hinder, as to try not to make it possible.
No, okay. In agricultural reporting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And well, I guess that must be economic interests that would rather not have some information brought to the public. That might be information about pollution or animal welfare or something. I think we've seen that at least, but I haven't done much reporting on that beat. I'm afraid.
Okay. And there's a question here. Just to clarify my question from earlier about your salary. You're fully paid by Politiken and not by any of the international corporations you're a part of?
Yeah.
So there's no funding.
There's no funding from outside. It's Politiken pays my expenses and my salary. But then again, the what we get from the ICRD is free for us. So it's a good deal, I think.
Mm. Okay. Do you see any? Do you see any possible agricultural investigative reporting corporations with your knowledge of agriculture as you know it?
Yeah, I think I do. One collaboration I did myself some years ago was about the financial aid for farmers in the EU. That's always a good story, I think, because it's the main part of the EU budget, and it's although it has been changed a lot of times, I think you can always raise really good questions to the way these money are spent. That's one thing, and I think in this all this climate reporting, agriculture plays an important part. I think there might be some stories there. But apart from that, I think I have too little experience to really know where to dig in. But I'm sure there's a lot of good story because there's a lot of money involved, and that's always a basis for some interesting stories.
That's a good point. And a lot of businesses going transnational. The big co-ops, the big companies, Nestlé, Lactalis, and so on. And right now, the coronavirus going across borders and infecting a lot of workers. Right now in Germany, before that in the States, United States, and so on. Could also be interesting.
Yeah, and I think the meat factory in Germany that's infected now is it has been part of some cross-border reporting earlier because it's a lot of the work from Danish meat factories actually moved to Tönnies in Germany because they had these low wages, which is now what's kind of causing these problems. I think it's interesting to see what's going to come out of this, because and that might be a good story. I think also a cross-border story where these if the authorities in Germany are going to clamp down on the way Tönnies' business is going on, then where are these jobs going? Can they keep so many animals slaughtered in Germany, or will they come back to, for example, Denmark or Holland? I think that would be interesting.
True.
This is water for it's pretty hot in Copenhagen today.
Yes, it is. It is. It's a good day to be in Denmark. Any more questions? We are running not out of time. We have more time, but please send more questions if you have. Also, I would like to add that there has been international cooperations among the Nordic countries. My colleague from Landbrugsavisen participated in an international tractor test that has been going on over the last few years, where 5 countries, I think, journalists from 5 countries met up in one place and did a big test of 5 or 7 tractors, which was published at the same time in the national newspapers. That was actually a good example of cooperation, not investigative, but anyway, still a big corporation. So, but it sounds like, John, that in your experience, it has to be big projects to justify big corporations.
Yeah, you can say that, but then again, if you have if you sort of have the infrastructure, if you have the communication lines open, then there's the way we do it in the European collaboration. We can also, set up cooperations on smaller stories that maybe only involves 3 or 4 of the media, or 2 media, or something like that, with a smaller story, and it doesn't always have to be sort of that investigative. You can also, for example, we have agreed on that we're going to help each other, keeping an eye on the development in making a corona vaccine. And of course, if you said, oh, okay, we're all going to keep our eyes open to what's happening in our country, and we're going to share it with once we hear something, well, that might be helpful. We don't know yet, but things like that, of course, you can. It doesn't have to be big scandals all the time.
Oh, that's interesting. It's more everyday work and a work in progress where you haven't started with a big leak, but say, well, we'll all keep our eyes open to this topic.
Yeah.
And help each other. Yeah. Elaine writes, we try to do investigative projects every year or 2 with one or more reporters. These include oil and ethanol subsidized, looking into what happened behind a fertilizer plant explosion in Texas. However, we haven't done cross-collaboration with other media when we worked on them. Something to think about for the future. So this has been food for thought. If there's any last questions here before we end this webinar, please send them now. Or I look forward to more talk about this topic next year at the Congress in Denmark. Let's just give them a few minutes. John, is there anything we haven't talked about?
I guess there are lots of things we haven't talked about.
But on this topic.
Yeah. Well, what can I mention? Well, I could mention that one thing that has that we have put the light on, as well as on tax avoidance and all that, is how poorly protected whistleblowers are, even in European countries. The sources behind LuxLeaks were actually sentenced with jail time and fines and things like that, until when they reached the Supreme Court in Luxembourg. One of them were freed, one still was fined, and his case is now in the European Human Rights Court. So I think that raised a discussion, because nobody really disagreed that they sort of did the public a favor by doing this, but still it was illegal in the laws in Luxembourg, and it caused the EU to make a directive about protecting whistleblowers that I think all the EU member countries have to implement it before the end of this year. But right before that, they made another directive that made the protection of business secrets even more strict. So they sort of contradict each other. So I don't know what's going to come out of it, because of course it's important that you respect the right to go public with something that the public should know.
Okay. A few more questions. How problematic are libel laws, especially when they differ from country to country, when it regards to getting the stories to print?
Yeah, that's it's a good question, because that's rather problematic actually, because the laws are more different than you should think. For example, the laws in Denmark and Germany are very different, and again, they are very different from the laws in France, for example. So when you have research material, for example, if you got emails, if you got some leaked email correspondence, that sort of is a documentation for the story. It's very different from country to country if you are allowed to use that or not. For example, in some countries, if one part of the email correspondence is a lawyer, then it's forbidden to make it public. And as in Denmark, we are very lucky in Denmark, because we have a legislation that says if when you're dealing with leaked documents, that they must have been provided in some illegal way, some way or another, but it's not legal. Then normally, if you sort of profit from something that has been stolen or illegally brought to daylight, then you could be punished as well. But in Denmark, if it's important to the public, and if you do not sort of cross the border where you go too much into people's private lives or things like that, then you go free. That's we've seen that in a lot of cases, and that's nice. But that's not the case in all countries. Far from it. And that makes it difficult when you discuss how to publish a story and how to confront the sources and all that.
Can they use you as a mole to publish some things, and then they can quote you on the stories? A mole is not the right, but can you be a gateway to publish these stories?
Yeah, we have done that. We have had to do it in that way in some instances. So that you can say, I'm not publishing anything from, for example, emails from a lawyer. I'm just quoting another media in another country. But it's annoying that you have to do it that way. But
true. There's a great example from British agricultural media that they have joined forces to do a large-scale survey. Even though they are competitive farming publications, they went together and did a great survey on hot agricultural issues, and then they released the results to the wider media. And hoping to do it again. So that's also an example of cooperation, and even between competitors. And they're hoping to repeat it a few times a year. That's very interesting, Olivia. And then there's a question: how do you coordinate the information and not become overwhelmed by all these data and other media interviews and so on?
Yeah, that's a challenge of it, of course. But I think you get some help because it's although you have an immense amount of data, you have some search possibilities that helps you a lot to sort of go more directly to the things you need, because of course when I have data like that, I look for stories that are specifically interesting in Denmark, and it's always possible to sort of filter the data in a lot of ways, so that you can sort these things out. But it is a lot of work, and I usually feel completely lost at times during a research like that, completely lost, and think I'm never gonna know what's up and down on this. But that's sort of part of the fun, I think.
Okay. Do people send you leads directly now because of your reputation as an investigative journalist?
They do, yes. We have. They do it, directly, or they do it. We have a sort of a secure channel called Secure Drop at Politiken, where people can upload documents without us knowing who they are, and we're not able to find out who they are unless they want us to know. And we get some stories through that. It's a good idea to have that, I think, and it's cheap. It's easy to install.
Yeah. And then there's this question, how can IFI, the International Agricultural Journalists Association, help freelance and young professional journalists around the world reporting under an atmosphere of political constraints or legislative authoritarianism in democratic societies? How can IFI-IJ help, as you see it, as an organization?
Well, I think it's I think that's one thing organizations can do, that you sort of that if they can sort of back you up if you're in any kind of trouble with lawyers or authorities or things like that. It doesn't necessarily solve the problem, but I think it helps if they know that there's somebody in other countries backing her up, and you can try to do an impact by contacting from the organization, contacting, for example, authorities if they are trying to restrain the media and things like that. I think we should use each other in that way. And the social media it's often a very effective weapon. In that if you start posting about, I did the story I mentioned about my colleague from Slovenia. We sort of started a campaign on Twitter to sort of let them know that the world is watching while you're doing this.
Okay. Very interesting. Well, I think that is going to be the last question. I would just like to thank you a lot for taking your time and telling us all about this. And I hope that this is the beginning of even more cooperation among agricultural journalists. I know there's a lot of cooperations on a daily, weekly basis among all of those who have been on a lot of congresses over the last few years. But from my side, I would just like to thank you, John. And then I would like to ask everybody who perhaps often read international stories online, if you quote them, colleagues at other papers, perhaps send them an email saying, hey, this was very interesting for me. I'm going to quote this in my paper. So letting them know that this is interesting across borders. Then you have made a connection, and perhaps they will return if they need help another time, or you can get back to them. That could be a beginning of a beautiful friendship, I think.
That's a good idea.
I did that last week with the Topicar, actually. And
okay.
I think it's going to be interesting. Let's see. So thank you very much. And I hope to see you all in Denmark next summer with very nice weather and good talks. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Jake, for doing a good job moderating, and we'll send out the chat with all the questions so people can have the reference to them And once we get e-Congress Week out of the way, then we'll get this material posted.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.